Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another conversation with Education Superheroes. Today we have with us Mr. Leon Hady from the United Kingdom. He is firstly an English teacher and he's also an e-learning specialist. He is the founder of Guide Education, which has reached about 500,000 students all over the world. And he's also reached teachers through teacher training, about 15,000 odd teachers through your training initiative. And Guide Education has been a pioneer in the industry, and we're grateful to have you here for this conversation, Leon. Welcome aboard.
Thank you very much for having me, Chip.
So to begin our conversation, I'd like to talk a little bit about the emergency e-learning solutions that have been popping up in all countries due to the pandemic. And this is something that education has struggled with in the past, because when we move online or when we move to a digital platform, we tend to take everything that we created on the offline mode into the online platform. And that seems to be the extent of the transition in many cases. How do you think we could come up with a sustainable solution that will help educators and teachers around the world reimagine online education?
So yeah, you're very much correct in that. The delivery model is still what we focused on because it's what we know and trust. Now, there are some criticisms about people saying we've moved and we've kind of kept a delivery model, but you can't expect people to do, you can't expect people to do other than what they know in the first instance. That's the whole purpose and point and the cause of innovation. We get somewhere, we realize what's working, what's not working, and then we start to move away from it. So in the first instance, it's brilliant that we have completely changed the entire accessibility of the curriculum from the very beginning to the end of university in a very short period of time. There was a famed professor who talks very much about, he writes quite widely about different items, and he's talking about trends in evolution and people development. And he makes the case that we've evolved in this period because there are so many, or he talks about his university where he says there were so many instances for 20 years we've been talking about online learning. When should we do it? How can we do it? What do we do? And then he said with the pandemic, we shifted in 1 week. Something we talked about for 20 years, we shifted to in 1 week. So we have to be very patient with everyone, because when we're looking at the transition for people to change their habits, their cultures and what they're doing, we have to understand that. The first lockdown, at least in Britain, we were amok. Everyone's like, what do I do? How do I do it? And we tried not only to get the delivery online, we tried to replicate a school day. With the second, third lockdowns, obviously teachers being such great innovators, we actually started to change that. More and more schools started to think about, actually, you don't need to replicate the same amount of time. Actually, there's part of it that needs to be live, and part of it is actually better off when you're on your own estimations, and following some of the independent learning content. What we have realized after months and months of this now is the human touch in everything that we do, be it learning, be it work, be it everything, is sorely needed. And I would say needed on a physical and mental level. There's parts unconsciously that the human body needs to connect with other people, even if it doesn't know it needs to do it. Even if it's someone walking into a shop just to moan at someone. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Do that. So what we've done now is we kind of completely detached the influence and the touch of people, and now we have to work about ways of bringing it back. So for me, thinking about the blended approach, it's not necessarily a blended approach in what we can do online. It's a blended approach between, for example, I would say 2 days in school, 3 days outside of school. You know, having setups like this, having and trusting community spaces where we know that what we used to call maybe youth centers or libraries, etc., having places where students can go to learn, but to learn at their own pace in the same way they're doing it online. The difference isn't whether we should do everything online and offline. The difference is how we can blend those two things well enough with things that are also are not schools. How can we get community centers to help? How can we get youth centers to help? How can we have even, neighbors' houses and friends and round tables? The tracking of learning, the tracking of where certain students are is really, really important. And this brings me on to something that was very close to my heart while I was a head teacher. A lot of the schools I worked in were what we would call in the UK inner city schools where you may see more social deprivation, more difficulties, more learning challenges than you would in, say, a leafy suburb. And so one of the elements of research, or what we tried to do in the school where I was a head, is trying to make the school much more of a community hub. If I could, and if I had the space, but I was in a city centre school, I would have tried to develop the support services for parents and families around the school. So at the same time, mum might be coming, for example, for a checkup or an appointment, You may then also be in a situation where the child can go off for those 2 hours and they have a learning environment where they can continue a matched curriculum to the school. Because what we have now is you have the whole curriculum for the school offline, so you can access it. Anyone can access it. And in fact, the UK government did a brilliant initiative in supporting something called the Oak National Academy. And that basically has now got about 12,000 lessons that cover the very first day in nursery all the way up to finishing your A levels. I mean, it's a phenomenal achievement, and we did that in 10 months. So you think now, if you were going to go or say dad had a job interview in some of these instances, or dad had study skills for training for 3 days, instead of them being able to just send the kid off to school that's completely detached, they could go to the same place, these community centres, in that's a loose term, but you know what I mean, like a hub for the family. The father could go and get in skills training, etc., or the mother's going for skills training, and the child has got this half day where they know, I can continue my curriculum. There's still days at school. They've still got a better bond with their parents because they need to be in those parents and stuff. And while this might sound quite space age, there's a recent book by John Hady and his colleagues called The Turning Point, where they actually comment on this happening in some of the most troubled areas in Australia, or in a place just outside Melbourne, for example, called Geelong, where it's actually worked and been done to great effect. The schooling, the hospital, the social support, all in the same space. I think they would call it the project in terms of something that they're trying to do. And apparently the results of that for community and family cohesion has been huge. Now, the second thing that online learning has thrust people, or the way that it needs to go, is we know from all the research that the involvement of carers and authorities always makes a difference in the outcome for a young person. The disinterested parent, the disinterested authorities, or the authorities that can't make that support for one reason or another, normally financing or normally recruitment issues, we know that has a massive, massive positive on children outcomes. So when you're doing that in a situation as well, I think the next big step for e-learning is to train and support parents, not throw them in at the deep end as we've done now, but to show them how to better help parents and learners in all ways. In the first pandemic in the UK, we started a free streaming school because we knew that was the immediate focus. Students need learning, they need access. With the second one or third one, because it had gone so well around the country, people being able to deliver online, we moved into a situation where we thought, you know what, we have to help the parents. So we made a kind of a mini teaching from home course, very high quality, 100 videos. We released it to schools. I'm very proud to say we've had dozens of schools take up our free offer of using it themselves as resources for their students, and thousands of parents have taken it up, so much so that we're turning it into other languages now, because parents didn't know what to do. The first thing they thought to do was to replicate the school day, but actually there's nuances of teaching that will not only help you in helping your child learn, but they help you in your relationship with your child. Because we don't think about it with our children. We think of authority or, friend, and we don't think of all the nuances in it because we're so busy. If parents had the time to concentrate and train on being excellent parents, they would be excellent parents. I don't think there's such a thing as a bad parent, in the general public. I just think there's just a lack of awareness and an ignorance that is not of their own doing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And with the whole teaching community now trying to support parents in trying to do what they do in lockdown 3, I think that's become a very strong and beneficial space and place. So they're the two things that I think need to, or would be beneficial to happen next. We turn this opportunity to pull away some of the learning just from being in schools full time, put them back in communities, decouple education, qualifications and study as well, so people have more options, and support parents more to be able to make a more integrated and appreciated step towards parents being able to help more outside of learning and inclusive of interests that the child may have. But also I do realize I'm having a very UK-centric approach. You might be able to say to me, well, actually in XYZ country, parents are so involved because of this. But I've been fortunate enough to live in Australia, China, Egypt, Dubai, and the parental engagement is always in the space where it's replicating their experience of school, their experience of study, not trying to use the technology and systems we have to really find that integration and flow. And you'll find that you'll have, if you do some of these items, because we trialed some of these while I was a head teacher, and thankfully what we did in the school got national recognition, and we were used as a model for a lot of other schools. It's that blended approach of trying to be able to personalize things outside of the school box. We always used to say that we never want to think about our school as somewhere where we throw children into. What we thought about our school was the child at the center, and then we would place the learning opportunities, the personalization around them. And it worked very, very well for us, and it can be done. And there are lots of projects around the world that I can point to showing signs of how that can be done further. I hope that gives you a thorough. question.
That was definitely a beautiful answer, and I'd just like to respond to a couple of things that you said. So the community centers that you mentioned, I think that's a brilliant idea. The Indian government, with their national education policy, the new national education policy that's coming out, have taken it kind of to the next step, where it's not just a community center, but it's the community getting involved in the learning process. So it's not only teachers who are responsible for a child's education or parents who are responsible. The community can access the students at these centers or at schools. And there's also this idea of apprenticeship where the students can learn with experts in different domains. That's what's happening in India. What we're doing at SCO campus is we've started up a classroom. It's called the Greatest English Classroom. And we have teachers from around the world connecting. Not just teachers, but also journalists, theater artists connecting and talking to students from around the world about language use and about the new skills that they need to develop in a post-pandemic world in terms of communication and language use. So that's the first thing. I think community becoming central to education and learning is very important, and that is definitely the way forward. When you talked about support for parents, I did watch one of your videos where you're talking about communication between parents and their kids. And very often parents don't notice that their body language might be showing a little bit of disinterest, or that some of the words that they use might put off a conversation or might have a negative influence. And that's really key, because all of a sudden we're all together in the same space all the time. And this wasn't the situation before. So I think that's, again, a brilliant initiative to help parents out in terms of understanding their relationship with their student or with their children, and especially parents who are also teachers. I think that's a double-edged.
That was one of the most surprising things, Sham, is when everyone was in the same boat, and everyone's it's hard to teach my kids this, that, and the other. But when it was actual teachers who were like, I can't do this, and then you just like, wait, what? So for me, and I know I posted it recently, but for me, this third one, we're fortunate enough that it wasn't so much a bother. The part that I hated was getting them to their seats, right, or getting
exactly,
them to and it's just even that, like, I was just dreading. I think it's like 17 times a day or 25 times a day I have to call them. So I actually just got lots of Alexas to just announce. I just put like a school clock. So I don't know if you just heard it there, but it just announced it. But it's what you said about parents it really reminds me of something that you have to speak to and work with a lot of parents to see. But in the hearts of parents, children are the most important thing, no doubt. In their habits, children are the most expendable thing. Mm-hmm. So you love your child and you really feel it and you can see that. But then in the way that your day of the routine is, I'll do it later. Don't talk like that. In the habits, they're the worst thing, but in their hearts, they're the best thing. And that is a real incongruence, right? And you want to try and get them to balance and blend more, but people don't know they're doing it. It's much the same way like with teacher training, which I know we'll come on to. When we had very subjective teacher training, where say you watched me, you were my mentor and you watched me, and then afterwards you sit me down, you say, I'm going to have feedback with you. I'm like, great. And then you're like, well, you did this and this and this. And I'd be like, no, I didn't. And you're like, well, no, I didn't. And I was just like, oh my God. But bringing video in, when you start, and this is the key thing of what we do, when you brought video in, all those conversations went away. So you'd be like, you did this and this and this. No, I didn't. Play. Oh my God, I did.
There it is. Yeah.
And it goes straight away. So it's wonderful in that. Sorry, it's one of my daughters. She's coming in for her lesson now as well. But okay. the element there, that incongruence that we have, and it's only when you kind of hold a light to parents and say, well, and they have to get out their habits first. They can't see where they are. And, I say this obviously of sometimes in my own family as well, but that's the thing that I'd say parents need most help with, trying to actually say, I know you love your kids to death, but you belittle them with your habits and the routines that you have. You have to unpick that to go back a step. And that's why I say the same with teaching, parenting, everything. Obviously controlling your language. I don't mean bad language. I mean, just, I had a colleague I was speaking to yesterday and he was like, the teacher says my child's aggressive. And I was just like, don't believe that. Don't take hold, don't this, that, and the other. That is, in other cultures, that's energetic. Do you know what I mean? Don't hold whatever it is, or they're a handful. That there's a positive now. But the second one is really trying to, and probably most important in anything, all of humanity, is the relationship. If you have a difficult relationship with a child, you can't teach them. Do you know what I mean? You need to get to a good relationship point, a good junctioning, whatever that win is. and then the relationship precedes the teaching.
I think that's perfect, and that leads nicely into my next question. I wanted to talk a little bit about early childhood education, and that's always been really key. The social interaction that kids get when they go into their classroom, meeting other kids, interacting with the teachers, and a space away from home, which is really important, or the first step into society, as you would like to say. So with the pandemic, a lot of early childhood education is confined within the home, with teachers online and parents who may be busy with their own work. So how do you think that impacts a child's growth? And do you think there are ways in which we can make the situation better for early childhood education?
Controversial as it might be, but obviously I live this. I don't think there should be formal education up to 5.
Okay.
Now, when I was doing my second master's, when I was trying to pick a dissertation to do, I looked at lots of different areas. Now, I ended up doing the underperformance of Black boys because of stereotypes and presumptions. But one of the areas that I really wanted to look at was where government funding is most effective. And there was a Labour government in the UK in 2010, and they had something called the Sure Start programme, and it had derivatives from this, that, and the other. And they tracked over time this, all the research was based on tracking over time the efficacy of every pound the government spent. What was the net result? And what they found was they put millions into secondary school, and it made very little difference in terms of what happened. Yeah. And they put thousands into primary school and early years, and it had an absolutely phenomenal effect on what happened. There is no more important stage to affect a child than early years in the entirety of the child. Afterwards, when they're in different hobbies and things, and obviously takes directions of their lives, qualification grades, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is to affect the whole child in a way that will actually plant seeds for the rest of their life because of the developmental stage of the child, because of the nature of the simplicity with which everything can be introduced to a child. That is absolutely crucial. And what there would need to be, or what they would do, and this is something I think of with all teacher training, is a general, accessible curriculum, worldwide and agreed upon by something like UNESCO or the UN or something like that, which can allow parents to have a very solid, well-researched, worldwide reference, not a Eurocentric or an Asia-centric, et cetera, base for what children are able to do. And all of them have to be into 15-minute chunks, and something that a parent with even the lowest education attitude can have, because it's not only about the instance of what they learn. I don't really think the brain is super developed enough for learning at that point anyway to take on all these different things. I remember when I used to take when we were picking schools for our child, and we were fortunate to look at a lot of schools, and we went into one with our eldest, and they were like, look, the 5-year-olds know isosceles triangles. And me and my wife looked at each other. I was like, do you care if Amira knows what an isosceles? And she's like, I would hate her to know what. And eventually, and at this time I was head teacher of an outstanding school in the UK. I was supposed to know what I was doing. And I picked a school that followed the Steiner methodology. And so I walked into this school, and I'd never seen such great behavior. And I've been to hundreds of schools. And I remember I just wanted to get to the head teacher, and I came in, how have you done this? How have you done this? How have you done this? Excellent behavior. And then you walked around and you looked at the classroom, and you realized the classroom had not changed for 200 years. And people always say that as a criticism of school. Well, schools look the same as they did 200 years ago. Well, what are you focusing on? If you're focusing on how much technology a place has and how shiny it is, and have we got VR bobbing in, that school had the best relationships between the parents, the staff, and the children I'd ever seen. The school focused on making sure that everything was about a real interaction. They did not allow recorded music. They did not allow any screens. They did not allow any toys. You were not allowed to bring in a uniform that would have had Mickey Mouse on it. It was literally about having blocks and pieces. And it sounds like the depths of poverty, but this was a private school we paid for, where my children would just have blocks to play with in class and pieces of cloth. And you're looking at it going, it works. I don't understand how it works, but it works. But then to actually support their method, obviously after we brought in and the children started going there, the first two, they just came out so confident and creative, and that's lasted with them a long, long time. And even now, I go into the other end of the spectrum, and the children, or the littlest one who's now 5, he's in a very nice private school. But the essence of the idea on relationships is the core still. It's augmented with expensive technology now, but the core is still exactly the same. And so what I always think with regards to early years is that's where we can make the most difference. That's where we have to have more time for parents, and societally things would need to change so both parents don't work, so parents have access to this permanent education. So everyone becomes, if I wouldn't say an early years educator, everyone who's going to have a child. I mean, you have to have a license to drive a car. Do you know what I mean? You can drive a car. Essentially, when you have a child, you're driving that child. And there is just no training, no anything. And that's what I love about what you said about the initiative in India, because it reminds me of that proverb, it takes a village to raise a child, right?
Exactly,
and we have the space in society, and there are European countries like Finland, Norway, Denmark that do make much more space and allowance for this with their maternity and their paternity support. That is in and of itself a challenge. What we shouldn't have people just saying, well, I've had a child 6 weeks now, back at school, now they're in nursery, now they're this, that, and the other. That's not to knock early educators in any way, shape or form. But it's also just kind of like, well, what have they achieved? What have they achieved? What have they achieved? And we still have to get away, I feel, or at least I always do it with any kind of educational thing I do, is your age means nothing. Your age means nothing. Obviously you can't see now, I'm 6'5". When I was up to about 11, they used to call me the little marble because I just hadn't grown. My body just hadn't filled out. In exactly the same way, we assume because of the age or the height of a child, they can do X, Y, Z. You don't know how big the brain has got. You don't know what parts are developed. You don't know what parts are latent. And that's a big thing when we think, I always say this to kids who think they're smart, is like, your brain might be growing just a little bit faster. It doesn't mean you're smarter than anyone else. But we have all these markers in society that say, by 5, you should have been this, by 7, this, by 9, that. And, I put one of my daughters in for one of the GC equivalents at the age of 10. She passed with flying colours. That's something people do at 16. And I tell her, that doesn't mean you're smart. That means I taught you how to do the test properly. Right? Do you see what I'm saying? So when I bring that all the way back to that young age, we have to be able to look at our children and just be like, it's okay. I need a good relationship with you, because hopefully as a parent, I'm going to be the mentor for the rest of your life. The first 3 years, it's not matter about your handwriting, how quickly you can write to 10. Because, one thing I always see when we lived in China, it was so important how much your child could do and remember. And I was always really, really scared, because I was like, your child can't read, he can decode. That's not the same thing. If you keep showing him the same screen every day and you say ball, 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 well, of course he's going to be able to say ball. But if I put the word ball in different letters somewhere else, he can't read it. So but anyway, that's, I feel very strongly about that, because I think knowing how pivotal early education childhood time is, and we rate it out, we farm it out to screens a lot of the time, and we farm it out to things that don't have a human interaction or a gentleness to them, and target driven. And I think that is, I'm not going to say it's tantamount to child abuse, but I'm going to say it does not give our children the best start in any way, shape or form. So with regard to how the pandemic could play out, it does come back to the idea of how people can just interact with their children, being given the time, being given the space, and being given an understanding to do it. An hour or 2 a day. Now, of course, you'd be like, well, I have to be with my child. They can't this, they can't that. Is actually, no, your child can. Your child can. Ignore your child for a bit in a way that's positive. So they're bored, let them be bored. They're bored, what does the garden have for them? They're bored, what does this have for them? Let them find the space to do it. We have very, very strict rules with screens for our kids. Before the pandemic, they were never allowed screens during the week, and you did loads of research as to why. But we always just said, whenever they say they're bored, I'll be like, yeah, your boredom is your responsibility, not mine. And to leave them in that space to do it. And then what have they done after that? They've made a piece of art, they've drawn something, they're out messing around in the garden. They will fill their time. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. But if you've made yourself the crux and the hook that everything they have to do is with you, then obviously they're going to be. You're basically, you've weaned them onto you. Then obviously they're going to have withdrawal symptoms when you wean them off you. I've always had a thing is like, no, you go and fill that hour. I'll tell you when I'm free. And obviously you do pepper great time with them as well. So it encourages time and ideas, etc. But you've really got to get away from any of the formalization of things up to that age of 5 as best as possible. And you see countless countries, obviously probably most powerfully some of the Scandinavian countries, who don't have any formal schooling till 7. And obviously there's reflections in society and societal cohesiveness that you may point at that as a success marker. But I think language and culture and history plays a much more of a bigger part in how we will grow and shape as cultures than necessarily what your schooling does to
you. Yeah, that's very complicated thing to process in a lot of countries, because early childhood education, it's given a lot of prominence, and it seems like the first step towards socialization. But then socialization in itself may not necessarily be the most positive thing for a child. So that's something to think about. And that when we think about autonomy and global citizenship, definitely what you said, having your child responsible for their own time and not having a standardized version or understanding of what your child should be able to do at a certain age, that will definitely help them become autonomous, understand independent learning better. And hopefully when the community and when parents come together and influence the child in a positive way, will lead to good ideas about citizenship, global citizenship, and environment, which is also a major concern for our generation.
And
skills.
Just I don't care when you do it. I care whether you're able to do it at the end of the time in which you're doing it. Now, I'm going to give you one story on that. Thank you very much. I'm going to give you one story on that really wrote. So I was an English teacher. I was then an AST. I was a head. The child had never failed. I had tuition schools. English is this, and reading is the most important, and that was it. And then me and my wife picked this school. And one thing I won't do is I won't kind of dip my toe in. If I'm in for the penny, I'm in for the pound. And so the school, I was like, hey, listen, Samira's 5 now, 5.5 or 5. And, all my friends' kids are reading, because there's that social pressure as well. And obviously, like, I'm who I am, so I'm not worried. I'll catch her up, if something, I'll catch her up. If she just does nothing at school, it's fine. I'll catch her up. And I'm lucky I have that skill. I'm not expecting anyone to do this. But I go to the school and I say, hey, listen, well, I don't mind, but when are you going to teach Amira to read, right? She's 5 now. I see everyone else, and they go, oh, when her rear teeth start coming through. And I look at the teacher like, cool. And I go away and I was like, we sent our child to a bonkers school, but she loves it, so I don't care. But he was right. As the development physically starts to mature, it's indicative of parts of the brain starting to develop. So 6 and 2 weeks, Amira couldn't read a letter, or she could basically read a letter. By 6.5 she'd read all the Harry Potters. So you think like, no, it's graded how it is. Learning isn't like that, and development isn't like that. All of a sudden, there's just like almost like an evolution within ourselves. When you look back through the Cambrian period of Jurassic, and there's an explosion of life, and we don't really know why. Well, there's lots of stuff bubbling on the surface, and then boom. And so the same way within the brain and the body, there's lots of stuff bubbling on the surface, then boom. When you try and actually train the brain to respond to, no, this is A, then this is B, and then by 5.5 you should be there. We had a parent and one of our friends come to us and was like, I'm gutted. And I was like, why are you gutted? They're like, our son is 5 and he's been put in the remedial handwriting class at school. And I said, what on earth are you doing to a child when you? And that's the class policy. Now look, if you need to have your children's achievements as a marker of you and your success as a parent, it's nothing to do with me. But you're not putting your child first. There is no one to turn and say, well, put my child first by forcing them into these strict guidelines of this, that, and the other. I will always vehemently disagree with that. And I use that example there just to show it is when it is. I as well, I was an average student. I mean, I got 1A, 4 Bs, 5 Cs. That's not great. I got B, C, D in my A levels. That's not great. And then I took 2 years out, right? I took a year out. And then I went back to university. And now I picked everything purposefully not to have exams, right? So I just took exams out of the equation at all. I would pick the most random subjects as my modules, just not to have exams. And then I started getting firsts, and I did really well. Then I got 3 masters and blah, 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 blah. And it was all because I got rid of the exam system and because I was ready for it then. As teenage years, I had other priorities. It wasn't important to me. But for 16 to be a determining factor for the rest of the shape of my life is cruel. And I will always say to people, decouple the actual time of your life and the examination, the expectation you have. Just focus on the skill. When Amira got to learn to reading, that's opened up the rest of the whole life now. Do you know what I mean? She's reading Barack Obama's autobiographies and whatnot, and I'm just like, Jesus, calm down, Amira. But it's changed. I have to fight her to take books and Kindles off her. But if you teach a child to read and you teach a child to be physically active, do you know what I mean? To enjoy some part of physical activity, be it running or a sport, this, that, and the other, half your job as a parent's done. The other part is you modeling how you treat other people.
So this is actually great because Singapore is a very unique educational setting. And I don't know if you've heard of this, but the PSLE exams in Singapore are very crucial. And they're so determining for a child's future that it has actually driven to a rise in child depression, child suicide rates. And if you talk to kids in Singapore, they will tell you that they have no time to play. And if you ask them, what do you wish for, is an hour to play or an hour to just be outdoors. And that's kind of at the core of what we do at SCORE Campus. We have 2 hours of sport every day with all our kids, and we play basketball, football. Just let them be active and give them that space, because they're not going to get it at home. Give them that space on campus to do it, so that their bodies are ready for all this information that they need to process and all the skills that they need to develop. So that I think that really resonates with what we're doing. And that's a great way
I'll tell you this on that point. It really, really resonates. So when we set up offices, we have offices around the world. We have an office in China, and we moved some of our English team and myself. We moved over to China, and we lived just outside Shanghai, in a place called Ningbo. Well, it's just outside for Chinese standards. It's a city of about 10 million people, and it was wonderful, China, and the clean and this and that and that. And then I was probably there for about 2 months, and I saw something, and I was like, what the hell is that? I was like, what was this? And it was 2 teenagers walking in the street. And I realized that I saw lots of people up to age 5, and then I saw lots of people over the age of 22, but you never saw anyone on the street between them. And you're just like, wait a minute. And you don't realize until you're just like, hang on a minute. And it was because they were always in some form of study, like perpetually studying. And I went, and obviously we made some Chinese friends. Amira, could you stop the tapping, please? We went and saw some Chinese friends, and I was like, why is this? What is this, and why is this happening? And they were just like, yeah, you can't. Everyone does 6, 7, 8 hours a day. You do before school, after school, this, that, and the other. I had one mother who sent me a picture, again, when she found out I was in education, this, that, and the other. And that was a great route for meeting people. And she sent me a picture, and she says, yeah, child will always work hard. And she had her 4-year-old. I promise it's true. I can send you the picture afterwards if you don't believe me. She had a 4-year-old reading a book in one hand, playing piano in the other hand, while doing the splits. So she's doing her gymnastics or playing an instrument and reading. And she thought that was amazing efficiency and this, that, and the other. Now, obviously you've seen China's progress, you've seen how China's going, and obviously I would never comment on where a country and nation is in its historical growth, because remember, especially in the West, and especially in India, India's got one of the oldest written heritages in the world. But where countries have obviously gone through a point where they've had their economic explosion, and then they're trying to work out where they are as a society, the needs and the pressures that come through them from government onto society, onto parents, onto kids is different. So in England, we have the luxury of being like, yeah, skills are important, and yeah, it's the whole child, because we've gone through we've got such a strong banking system, our languages around the world, we've got that. So you look at different cultures and you actually think, well, they've got that. China, it obviously has had it, and now it's going through it. And I think China in 50 years will just be very different, because it will hit a maturity in economy sense, and then the rest of societal needs will actually filter through. Same as we saw in Japan, because if you saw Japan, how Japan worked, it was the same thing. I remember being at school myself, Shyam, and that thing about suicide rates is, I remember my teacher turning around to me and, someone said something like, well, GCSEs aren't that important, or this, that, and the other. And then the teacher turned around and said, look, if you were in Japan, you would not be saying that. Because if you fail your GCSEs in Japan, you're very likely to kill yourself, because that's the rest of your life over. And I could never get my head around it. And I could never actually be a supporter or the idealist around that in any way, shape, or form.
Hello.
Layla, do you want to say hello to Mr. Shyam?
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Home learning.
Very, very boring.
What would make what's better? What would make home learning better for you, Cookie?
If we didn't home learn.
Where would you like to be?
I don't get it.
Where would you like to be instead of home learning? Where would you like to do your learning?
School.
Why?
Because you actually get to teachers help instead of the teachers not being able to present their school.
And so there you see, you've got a technological gap teachers are getting on with, you've got the social gap, but obviously, and when you record lessons, because we record a lot of lessons, when you see how she's a mini me, Shyam. Come here, Lils. Come here, little mini me. Like literally, that is what I looked like when I was little, like 100%.
That was what I was thinking when I saw her.
But the element there is when you record lessons, you realize that a lot of the teaching that happens for some kids doesn't come from the teacher. Someone in the class has understood, maybe 5 or 6 kids, and everyone's going, what does that mean? Where did you get that? Da, 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 da. And so you forget that. That's a whole thing we didn't mention in the first section, is how do you replicate that? Because that is such an important thing. Kids learning from kids, kids supporting kids, even if it's just in that whole like, do question 3. That means something because you've missed it first time. Do you know what I mean?
A lot of what you're saying, it really resonates with many teachers, and I'm sure that a lot of teachers have thought some of these things through, but the system takes time to change, and that's exactly why this is so important, because the transitional energy that the pandemic has brought has really, like you said, helped us evolve in a really short span, and this leads to a lot of different platforms coming on board, and teachers having access to different resources in terms of training, and just teachers getting together and having conversations. I wouldn't have thought about this kind of an interaction before the pandemic, probably. So just over the last couple of months, I've thought about connecting and having conversations with teachers around the world, because I think there is value in sharing our ideas. Teachers usually tend to work behind their books in many countries. So they have a pile of books to correct, and they tend to be behind those books and not see what's going on around the world, or just even in the next classroom. But when you do have conversations, I think that really helps both the teacher, their class, and everyone in that setting. So that's kind of where this interaction comes from.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've, even before the pandemic, you touch, if you go, because for my work I travel a lot. So last year I was on like 118 different flights traveling around this and the other, teacher training here, teacher training there, blah blah. And then wherever you go, you always get invited to something or something. And every one of those things, everywhere in the world, there's always someone talking about a revolution. There's always someone talking about things need to change. And it's not someone who's out in the field and like on the conspiracy level. It comes back to a point where people are actually seeing the need in their communities. And when you focus on the need of the community, not the need of the government standard, then the need changes completely. And while I say that, I don't criticize any government for it, because a government's job isn't to necessarily, I say educate you. The government's job is ultimately to keep order in whatever way that it can, because you don't want to break into civil disobedience and obviously places with other things. And an education system, the health system, everything is based around that, and obviously the finance of it. And so I'm quite sure that a lot of governments would wish to decouple the need for educated people in a certain type of education to come up and become your new tech stars or your lawyers or your doctors. I wish that, I know a lot of governments would love to actually change the way that works. And obviously you look at Sweden, where, you know, someone who sweeps the roads earns as much as a surgeon, you know, when you account for tax and this and that, and they next each other, that, you know, but even at that point we'd look at it and be like, well, that's so fair. But then in the Swedish system, they say, well, actually, we'd rather it was more meritocratic. Or was based more on meritocracy, should I say, rather than trying to make up a word. But the element there is true and refined. And I just think that it's not that schools are completely wrong, or the grading is wrong, or the exams are wrong. There just needs to be a lot more nuance in it. It is helpful to actually have a barometer of something at different times, without a shadow of a doubt. I was just listening into one of my son's live lesson this morning. He got a certificate. He's jumping up and down. Do you know what I mean? So it still has meaning, it still has relevance. I don't deny that at all, but it's just, it has to have the nuance of the flow, and it has to have much more respect. And it can't be the rest of your life is over because you didn't this. It can't be, you'll have to be stigmatized into lower groups in the rest of your life because of this. Because having the same success and achievements as everyone is I always tell my kids, and, you know, I'm grateful that they are who they are, but I always tell my kids, I just don't want you to hurt anyone. Don't hurt anyone. Just bigger. I don't care what, if you be a surfer, you be a surgeon, you be a billionaire, you be a road. I really don't care. Just don't hurt anyone and learn to live with yourself. And that's what my teaching of them is all about. They do a lot of their extracurricular, this, that, and the other. But my thing is about relationships, and key that relationship with yourself. And I just hope there's more focus around that coming up in the future, because the thousands of students I've got to work with in schools, in my own schools, in my tuition agencies, and even training teachers now, the relationship with self with those people is so poor. And I say this, and obviously it's a slight tangent. My background is my parents had real severe mental health issues at different times, and obviously I grew up as a child amongst that. So my goal from 0 to 24 was just not to suffer that. So my interest, part of my degree was psychology, so much social, this, that, and the other. And that's why when I got into teaching, so much of it was second nature to me, because I'd been protecting myself from when I was conscious at the age of 11, 12. I'm like, I don't want to be like that. So I had 10 years of everything I could do to learn to improve and protect myself. It was there. And that came through in all my teaching, all my training, everything that I do. And you realize it's such a It's something, I wouldn't even say it's there. Most people don't even have the idea and concept of actually looking after yourself, caring for yourself, giving yourself a break. And that's the physical, let alone how to actually control or to best guide and to best respond to all the stuff that's sparking off in here.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about teacher training, and that's something that I know that, guide education is really popular for teacher training and getting teachers to adopt the guide methodology and use it in their teaching. I recently watched a webinar that you had given, and I think you said something along the lines of teacher training in most settings is something that's done to the teacher rather than something that the teacher is involved in. And that really sparked a note, because many a times when I talk to teachers in different countries, most teachers always look at teacher training as something that's a hassle, something that's going to delay some work that they need to get done before a deadline. And that's the general attitude towards teacher training. How can we make teacher training more inclusive and actually more useful, especially at this time when it's something that teachers need?
So I'd like to make a small differentiation there. Teacher training courses in the ITT, the degree and this and the other, they're excellent and they have their place. What happens after your initial teacher training, or sometimes during your initial teacher training, that I have much more of a problem. Something that we call in England CPD, Continuing Professional Development. So it falls into two camps. The first of which in the CPD teacher training is generally pointless and there's no revealed impact for it. We're going to get you all into a room at the end of the day between 4 and 6 and we're going to talk at you from a PowerPoint. Whereas if you did this to your kids in class, we'd kick you out of school. But we're going to do it to you as teachers because you're an afterthought to us, or your CPD is an afterthought to us. Not, again, it's that same where your heart is. I love my teachers, I love my staff, but in my habits, I'm going to treat you like crap because I've got so many other things. And that's what my inset shows you. Yeah. So that's the part I'm real issue with. So I've never been to an inset where I don't think it could have been done in a fifth of the time. I've never been into an inset where ultimately the person giving the talk was better than the collective knowledge of the room. I've never been to an inset where I've taken something and even try as I might, I've then launched that initiative across the whole school effectively. So there's so many issues there, just as I say it. I've never been to an issue that I would say is value for money. And I don't mean me paying it. I mean in terms of I've got 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 staff in this room. This 2 hours that we're spending in school to look at a PowerPoint is costing me £40,000 in wages. It's absolutely bizarre. So the element that we really focus on there is really thinking about the impact. And also with teacher training, it doesn't matter what I say, and it doesn't matter what your reflective form says. Can you do it? Number one, can you do it? Number two, can you iterate with it? Number three, can you show me how it impacts the child? So the way that we really focused our system on development to be is everything is videos, and you can make videos really, really quickly because the information, it doesn't need to be glossy and shiny. How much time do you, and you remember, and I remember it as well, when we were doing a presentation, like the presentation better look good. It's like, presentation didn't matter. Ultimately, in terms of impact, it did on the day for how people felt. But what did that mean towards impact? Nothing. And we know from a lot of the training that we do that we only get 1% impact, 1% impact benefit from training days that don't have an impactful measure to follow and actually an adherence to it. So we set up the system where you would watch a video, there's like a mini seminar in the video, so you all in the video can have a mini seminar, but then afterwards it's all about what questions have you set on the training and what questions have you planned to come up a month later. So at the moment you might be asked, how do you think this is going to help you do X, Y, Z? That pops up and then you do it. But then the setter of the question sets a question that will come up in a month that says, please record how you've impacted this in your class. So you're not just kind of saying it's going from delivery. You moved across from that and you've got into a situation where you're saying, now reflect for now, but no, this is going to be relevant later. Because how many times have you done a training and just been like, click, 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 and you're done? Or you sit there and just like, what am I going to have for dinner? I'm going to pick up the kids late. So annoying I had to do this. If you don't put the CPD in a way that actually people want to consume it, you are force feeding them. And you're force feeding them something, so you're ticking boxes on a government level, you're not putting the person first. But it comes back to that, and again, leaders never intend this. A leader never be like, yes, I'm going to waste £40,000 getting people in the room to do some stuff that they're never, no one does that. It's just the tool to mechanize that at speed never existed and wasn't there. Thank you very much. The tool never existed and wasn't there. So if I go all the way back and actually touch upon what the difference with what we do is we try and tell you right from the beginning, and it's hard for schools to get, is it doesn't actually matter what your video looks like. It doesn't really matter what you say. All that really matters is it's impact led, right? What do you want the result to be? I need the result to be that more children are doing this, that, and the other. Okay, great. So because you do that, what do you need to see to prove that? Well, I need this. Well, that's your end question. What do you want them to think of in the first question that actually makes them think about how they're going to change or deliver stuff for the impact question? That, great. Now you know how to make your resources. Do you see what I mean? Whereas we start with, oh, I heard something good. I am going to tell people this, that, and the other. And look, don't get me wrong. I was excellent at what I call now rah-rah days. You know, teachers would come and they'd learn about technology, or they'd learn about being outstanding, or learn about this, that, and the other. You know, we used to have, when I was a head, they used to send school leadership teams for new schools to come and see how we did it in this. And I realized, I was like, this is, I nearly swore, this is pointless. This is pointless. What they need is they need a set, like a 3 or a 4 stage junction where I can be like, look, here's a little bit of information. What have you done with it? How's it made a difference in your school? How do we iterate? And that's what they needed from me. They didn't need to come and see a day of how someone else has done it brilliantly. They need to take the core, which I should be able to condense into 15 minutes, and then place that along a training and an idea. Now, I'll say something about the guide teach training, and we're in 700 schools, and it's really, really popping, this, that, and the other. If I had my, if I was allowed is the wrong word, but again, you have to play the game in terms of, this is what they say is important in teacher training, I have to put it in there. This is what they say comes up in a course, I have to put it in there. This is what they think middle management is, I have to put it in there. But it's, again, you know what I was saying about with the children and the parents at home, you'd have an alternate method completely, which is actually the best research and what has actually worked, as well as best practice, this, that, and the other, and be peppered. And it would be criteria-less. In some ways, I'd like to do that teacher training, because I think that teacher training is still following a method that is based on, we're trying to train you in a range of methods that crosses too many things. And in the same way that we have GP practice and GP specialism with medicine, people have a base and then they go and specialize very quickly. We don't do that in teacher training. We have a base and then we assume that the subject is a specialism, but it's not. But we really need more people to be not just because they happen to be good because of their personality type in many cases. They happen to be good at being creative. They happen to be good at behavior management. Really, you're saying to a lot of people, then try and model someone else's personality. But each strain has a science to it. And what I would have done if I could do it again is I would do something much more like that, where it's really just about, here's all the science, the research, and the best practice. And sometimes the research and the best practice don't mix. That's fine. Accept it. It's okay for teaching to still have wonder in it, but we don't know why something works. But it's going very, very well. But you know, the next stage is upon us, where we actually try and look with some of the best professors around the place that we work with to thinking what's the best research-based stuff, and what's that, because the thing about technology is we can do things fast. We can do things fast and we can change them fast. So we don't have to have a scheme of work from the beginning of the year that says this, that we stick to rigidly throughout the year because, you know, that budget was tied into this, that, and the other. We can change a video in a microsecond. After a lesson, you can actually capture the best of that to actually share best practice. And that's what we need to make more of a network community that's constantly researching, rather than waiting for universities to publish research, which then filters down into training days, which then filters down into schools. And then we haven't really seen the efficacy of it outside of the test. Whereas if you say you had a network of 1,000 teachers, these are the new things, this is what's shown to work there and there and there, all of you get on and try it now, what happens then? Maybe we have great success. And that's where I want to be in training and trialing that.
That's great. I just want to talk to you a little bit about something that we're building. It's called Let's Flip, and it's a video generation app. So every user can create a 90-second video, and other users will respond to it with video. So that sounds like a good space for teachers to come on and try this out. So these are all done in missions, and each mission could be then executed by teachers around the world, and then we could have a discussion about that. Having said that, there's another thing that I really noticed when you started your chat about teacher training, is there's initial teacher training, which is before you get into the school system, and then in-service teacher training, or CPD. And these two have traditionally sat in different spaces. I'm of the thought that integrating or bringing these pre-service and in-service teachers together at some juncture might be great, in terms not just for the pre-service teachers, but also for the in-service teachers to keep abreast with what's going on in research and in literature. So that's something that I think we could do.
That's really, really important. I always think, like, how do universities keep their relevance afterwards? Bearing in mind that a lot of the things that when we went to university, they're defunct, irrelevant, this, that, and the other. So would it not be the case for universities, especially when they wanted to continually sign up money? How about you had access to all their latest research every year for another £300? Do you know what I mean? So you kept up to date with it. It's exactly the same with teacher training in terms of how you go from there. And there's a real interesting thing what you say about there. There's the legality or the form or the base of what teacher training is. But then there's a difference between what the philosophy of teacher training is. And because the philosophy then of what you need for your teacher training is shaped by your context, your school, your colleagues, the students in front of you. So you need to have different things. Your teacher training can't prepare you for that. And that's why I don't knock the institutions that give you this is the legal requirement to do this, because again, it's a government mandate to make sure that we have ubiquitousness, safety, we don't get sued, people are looked after, and we try and improve the standards within that. But if you think about trying to do that, well, this 2 years or this year in England, any of this PGC, or some courses in England, 6 days of training that you have is going to serve you for the rest of your teaching career? Impossible. Impossible.
Yeah.
And that's actually what we built into the guide system. We have the first 5 years of teacher training ready for you. But then on top of that is the system which allows schools to keep putting video and video on video, as you kept saying, so they can keep making contextualized items. So we very crudely, I refer to it this way, Shyam, and say, you like pizza, right? No,
yeah.
If you don't like pizza. I like pizza. What toppings do you like?
Pepperoni, olives, jalapenos.
All right, cool. So, but whatever happens, it's more than likely we're going to have a bread base, right? Some kind of bread base with a dough. You might have stuffed crust, you might not. You're going to have tomato sauce, maybe, right? And then you're going to put your pepperoni, cheese, and the rest on it. I'm going to have a base, but then I'm going to have barbecue sauce, and I want pineapples and prawns. And so my initial teacher training, that part is, you can all agree on that can be a good base. But then afterwards, every school has a responsibility as its CPD to build on that and go off. Because the technology hasn't allowed us to do that yet, that's the only reason schools aren't doing it. Educators all across the world are excellent, and they will be able to do it now that the technology is there and proven. Remember, it has to be proven. You can't be like, this is, we're still getting all these tech issues all the time anyway, but now it's more proven. But that first part, the technology, will allow you to get the technicalities of delivery and content, the base. But the philosophy of education should shape how each branch goes for each individual school. Because if, as soon as you start to deliver teacher training or create, and you only need one teacher to do it. This isn't, we're not talking rocket science now. You need just one teacher to do it in a school, whereas previously you needed everyone on the same board, everyone at the same time. One teacher to do it, and you can start to put those seeds that really get the context and the philosophy and the heart of the school into the training, on top of that pizza base. I hope that's our mission, because as you probably know, by 2030, the UN or UNESCO, apologies, I think it's UN actually, they predict that we're going to be 68 million teachers short around the world. That's 9 years. 9 years we're going to face a shortage of more than the entire population of the UK. And so we're trying to do something about that. And I think the idea that you said there, when you're pioneering in what you're doing with video to video, that's where the future is. And just to give you a tiny example on it, just this morning, 11:45 last night, I'm working. And I get a message through on this screen recording app that we built from one of the teachers saying he can't do something on the thing. And I was like, great. So I send him at 11:50, I send him a video back because it takes seconds. We haven't had to arrange a meeting. We haven't had to speak to each other. We haven't had to go through any formalities. It's ping, ping, exactly like a text message, but with videos showing the whole screen and where the issue is. And so we had this morning 2 more interactions like that. And he's like, Leon, this is brilliant. Never solved the problem so much. And I was like, now, imagine using that for your teacher training.
Yeah.
And that's where the video to video, like you say, is so powerful. And the video to video can give us such insight. The video to video can give us such objectivity. And more importantly, the video to video can give us such an opportunity to then share best practice at speed. And that's how you'll improve teaching around the world, when you can take all the different ideas from all different contexts and put them in one collective library of understanding and best practice within minutes.
So that was a beautiful conversation, Leon. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Shyam. I really, really appreciate you thinking of me.
Yeah, thank you.